Hello and welcome to The Right Idea, where we discuss the people, policy, and politics that drive Texas. I'm your host, Brian Phillips. I'm the Chief Communications Officer at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. And not with me today is my normal co-host, Derek Cohen. He's out somewhere around the country doing public policy things, but that's okay because we have someone who is just as entertaining and just as compelling, our Vice President of Policy, Andrew Brown.
Many would say an upgrade over Derek Cohen.
Many are saying that you're an upgrade and you're trying to take his job. So let's see how you do today. So thanks for being on with us. We got a great show. We're talking about a really big issue. Education funding is half of our state budget, and so there's a lot of issues that go into that. And so we have one of the top experts in the country who's been doing research on our education systems getting the bang for their buck. But first, I want to talk about. We always like to do a little hot take at the beginning. October, as you know, because you're a huge sports fan, Andrew. October is Sportsapalooza.
Yes,
because you have all the major top professional sports are literally playing right now. So every single day you can see a basketball game, a football game, a Major League Baseball playoff game.
It's fantastic.
A lot's going on. You even said that college basketball is starting here in a few weeks.
Less than 20 days now.
All right.
Tip off for college basketball.
So what are you watching? And if you've got your pick of NFL, of college football, whatever, what are you watching?
I mean, the thing I'm watching this week, obviously, and folks who know me know I'm a massive University of Kentucky Wildcats fan. My dad played football there in the 70s, and your University of Texas Longhorns are coming up to Lexington.
That's right.
And we're not good at all in football this year.
Some might say we're not very good this year.
I'm just glad y'all beat Oklahoma because I want you cocky. I want to be overlooked.
Trap game.
Trap game. Exactly. Let's go for the trap game.
Here comes the trap game. All right. Well, speaking of schools, education is always on the front burner with Texas. Like I said, it's half our budget here. We spend over $100 billion on public schools here in Texas. So every legislative session, every interim session, there's always some kind of education issues that need to be covered and are hotly debated amongst polling here in Texas. It's not the number one issue, but now that the economy is taking over and border security is kind of taking a back seat, you get things like healthcare and education, Andrew, that are starting to pop up in the polls. Obviously, millions of parents and educators are all very concerned about the future of education, and just Texans in general. They have a moral responsibility. It's like if you're providing for the next generation and providing the right education, you're considered to be a good society. So I think even the average Texan would agree that we need a good education. And maybe you can talk about this a little bit later on for us, but there's been a lot of changes in Texas on education almost every year. School choice, of course, not the least of which, a huge school choice win this last legislative session for Texas. And although we weren't first or second or third or even 30th,
we got there eventually.
We are going to launch the largest day one school choice program in the history of school choice. Absolutely. So we're happy about that. Things always got to be bigger in Texas.
And I'm hearing that in my neighborhood. Last night had friends over, and folks who don't follow politics are asking about, what are these ESAs? How is that going to impact my child's education? People are paying attention to education in ways that I've never seen them pay attention to.
We got to start saying EFA now. It's actually Education Freedom Accounts is now what they're called. But of course, there's new funding every year. I mean, despite what the left says, there's always new funding. Now, we can get into some of the ins and outs with our guests on this in terms of per capita spending and all of that and what that means. But the total number of dollars that go into the education budget increase year after year after year. We're always focusing on teacher pay and ways to get more money into the classrooms. And then, of course, testing is always like a big issue.
Which is another huge change. Revamping the standardized tests and how we measure academic progress of our students starting next year.
So one of the things that, and even though we talk about all of those issues, one of the things I don't think we get into enough is, how do you evaluate whether or not the dollars are being spent wisely? We don't really, conservatives kind of bring it up. Certainly our organization has brought that up. But the debate doesn't really happen over that. It's either more or less or where the money goes because of various special interests and all that. So I wanted to back up a little bit and bring in our guest to talk about that because he's written extensively on this issue on the intersection between education and economics. And so today we're going to dive into this big question on education policy. Does more spending on schools actually improve student outcomes? For decades, education advocates have argued that that higher funding means better teachers, smaller classes, and more resources, ultimately leading to better results for students. But critics, maybe some of those in this room, might point to examples of states and districts that have dramatically increased spending with very little measurable improvement in learning. We, of course, argue that how the money is spent matters much more, or how it is spent is much more important than how much is spent. So is it dollars, design, or discipline? So we're gonna jump into that with our guest. We're honored to be joined by one of the most influential thinkers on the economics of education, Rick Hanushek. Rick is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, where he is in his office right now in beautiful Palo Alto, California, where it's much nicer weather there than it is here. Let's see. His work sits at the intersection of education policy and economics. His research, especially linking teacher quality and student learning gains, has transformed how scholars and policymakers think about school reform, teacher evaluation, and national competitiveness. He is the author of many books, he tells me, but I will point out one of his books, The Knowledge Capital of Nations, and many other seminal books, and hundreds and hundreds of widely cited articles. Rick, thank you so much for being on The Right Idea with us today.
Well, it's wonderful. I have to sit here in Palo Alto and can't be in Austin, but I'm happy to be with you guys.
Well, we're kind of the University of Texas, of course, is here, and it is very, very liberal school. Maybe not quite as liberal as Stanford, but we all deal with those issues here as well. Well, let's jump in. I mean, let's just get right into the question. Like, what do you, when people ask you, is the juice worth the squeeze? Is the money going to improve education outcomes? Can you answer it for us once and for all? What is it? Is it more money, better education, or is it more nuanced than that?
Oh, I think it's much more nuanced than that. It's obvious that money can make a difference and that you can get good results from spending, but it's also equally as obvious that it doesn't necessarily have to happen. And so what we've seen over time is a battle of people who just want to put money into schools in an unrestricted way and hope that things get better. And historically, they haven't consistently. As I say, some places can, in fact, spend their money better and others don't do very well at it.
So there's not even like a general trend in terms of, if you spend more money, it might not be as efficient, but you'll generally see better outcomes. But you're saying it's all over the map?
Well, it depends on how far back you want to go. If you want to go back to like 1970 and compare it to today, we're spending 4 times as much per student today as in 1970. That's in inflation-adjusted terms, real terms. And by our test scores, they're about even to what we measured in the 1970s. You could say, well, that's just part of the pandemic, but no, it's not. We've been pretty constant. Scores increased a little bit in the last 25 years, but then about a dozen years ago, they started falling off. And we're now spending a lot more money and not getting much more out of it.
So what you're saying really resonates with, I think, what a lot of us here at the Foundation believe. It's what you spend the money on, how you spend the money matters a whole lot more than how much you're spending. Do you have some real world examples of that principle playing out, whether it's specific districts or specific policies, where that distinction between the amount of money spent versus what it was spent on made a difference in the lives of students?
No, absolutely. It's very easy. In fact, I can come down to Texas and do it. But let me start someplace else that people haven't talked enough about, and that's Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C., you might remember 15 years ago, there were dramatic fights between Michelle Rhee and Randy Weingarten, the head of the teachers union. And at the end of those fights, they changed the way they evaluated teachers and the way they paid them. So they paid large bonuses to the best teachers in DC, and they fired a bunch of teachers who were the least effective teachers in DC. And if you trace the performance of students in Washington, D.C., it's still not a superb district, but if you trace what's happened over time, Washington, D.C. has done better than any other large city school system in the country over the last 15 years, which I would attribute to making improvements in the way we recognize and pay teachers.
Our studies, you mentioned teachers, our study of the studies that maybe you've seen a lot of those too, that demonstrate, things that worked to improve to improve student outcomes really comes down to three things, and maybe you've got your own list on this. Number one is of course excellent teachers. There's just no substitute for the person who's spending 40 hours or however many hours with your kids every week. Number two is a quality curriculum, and that's one thing that we're fighting over here in Texas most recently. We can go into that a little bit, but we've done several shows on that here, this Bluebonnet curriculum, and not just that, but how it's being taught, not just what the content is, but then how it's being taught. We're actually literally in the middle of a dogfight on that right now. And then three, which I think always gets left out too often, is parental engagement and how engaged parents are in the lives of their children's or in the education of their children. Is that a list? Is that are those three things on your list? And is there anything else that we're missing there that's a key component of improving educational outcomes?
Well, my list would start with number three. We've known ever since we measured student outcomes that families are really important. That was the original study of quantitative analysis of school performance. The Coleman report in the mid-1960s focused on family differences, and we know it's important. The problem is we don't know how to change it very much. We don't know how to change parents, and we don't want to intrude that much into the families in general, but how do we get parents more involved? That leads me to one, your number one, and that is effective teachers as far as I can see, are the dominant aspect of schools. And how do we make sure that we have effective teachers in every classroom is the policy challenge. Curriculum is something that I think is important, but that's not at the top of my list. Frankly, there are certain things we want kids to know, and it's nice that we specify what we want them to know, but it comes down in my book to how well the teacher implements any curriculum, how well they do in the classroom, that determines where the kids will end up.
In Texas, we have this blowing statistic, this eye-popping statistic that only about 40%, maybe a little more, but definitely under 50%, under half of all the money that's spent on K through 12 public education in Texas actually goes into the classroom. And that's a pretty broad definition of what we consider to be going into the classroom. The rest of it, more than half, is to administrative costs and so on and so forth. So, and then we're talking about over $100 billion. So it's a $50-some-odd billion, $60 billion industry of things that have nothing to do with what's going on in the classroom here in Texas. What should districts and the states, and schools, what should they be spending their money on?
Well, I think it's more nuanced than just how much money goes into the classroom and not. In simple terms, for me, they should be spending money on effective teachers. And so I didn't give you the story, the exact examples that I was asked about, but I have two others, and one is Dallas, Texas, and the other is Houston, Texas, where there have been dramatic changes in the way teachers are, and leaders. When I say teachers, you should always add principals and other leaders in the schools. Dallas dramatically changed the way they evaluated and paid teachers and the way they used them. And what we've seen is that it can have huge impacts on the performance of the schools. then that was all due to Mike Miles, the plan in Dallas. He left before it was fully implemented, and Michael Hinojosa and others have followed on to actually implement this plan. And I think that we see that Dallas is one of the examples that we should be looking at nationally. But then when the state of Texas took over the Houston school district, Mike Miles was appointed superintendent, and he's there today. And by all the preliminary results, he's doing an extraordinarily strong, making an extraordinarily strong impact on student learning. The number of failing D and F schools in Houston has just plummeted after years of having schools that continuously didn't help their kids.
Mm-hmm. What's driving this growth in the educational administrative state? Is it policymakers putting more and more requirements unrelated to educational performance on these schools? Is it a concerted effort on the part of interest groups to drive up the administrative activities, the programming that we're expecting schools to do? What's at the root of money being siphoned away from teacher training, curriculum, actual education outcomes into the administrative side of school districts?
Well, the simple answer is yes to your questions. We have in many ways developed this system where we run schools by mandates, and we have a compliance-oriented system where people have to continually report that they're not doing bad things to kids, as opposed to being rewarded for doing good things. And partly we need to just flip the system around so that the focus is on student learning and not trying to mandate something that in the 1,200 districts for Texas, it's hard to think of a single rule that applies to all 1,200 districts. We ought to be rewarding performance and success and not others. And of course, every organization seems to have the objective of increasing its size. So we have districts that have central offices that have new ideas that they want to fund, and they systematically do that, and it leads to this administrative bloat.
If I'm playing devil's advocate with some of those arguments, advocates will argue that even if test scores don't rise, some of these additional programs that you referenced, such as, the diversity and equity programs, are a good for students. It improves their self-esteem, their well-being, basically making a moral argument about spending and the role of the school in the child's life and sense of self. Does that matter? Does that argument actually hold water?
Well, as we said, talking about curriculum and other things, schools have a big role in our society, and we expect schools to, in fact, bring along the civic responsibilities and sort of general cultural norms of our society. So that's a certain part of it. When it comes to should we spend to do more, or can we just excuse all of the past spending for these things, I'd be happy to listen to those arguments if in fact people measured what we were getting for it and showed that extra money did in fact lead to improvements in various dimensions.
I want to note that, when you talk about successes, you're listing out specific cities and specific districts, in states. You're not saying, the state of Texas did X, Y, Z, or the state of Vermont or the state of Massachusetts, and that it's really the district level reforms and the district level implementation that makes a difference. That's really difficult in Texas because while the state is run by rock-ribbed conservatives who are pushing for these types of reforms and issues, the districts in the cities are all run by sometimes left-wing lunatics, and so they're who are beholden to the teachers unions or what other forces may be. So you have that issue where we're all looking at places like Dallas that might have done some of these reforms, but a place like Austin will just never do it because they're totally owned by the left wing. What can the states? I mean, are there examples of where states have kind of forced their will on districts? I mean, I hate to do that as a conservative because we always want to make we love local control and we think the decisions are made better at the local level. But when you see this insanity happening, and of course generations of kids who can't read and do math at grade level still graduating, you just wonder how do you fix that problem if the locals aren't willing to do the right thing?
Well, I think Texas has done some good things in those dimensions. I'm not up to we're into, as I say, mandates and compliance, and when we try to come down on top and tell the districts how to do their business, we have to be pretty confident that we know how to do it, and I'm not sure that we always are. The thing that Texas did was it 3 or 4 years ago with HB 3, the school finance legislation, and followed on a bit with HB 2 recently, was design what I think is the right way to proceed because of the politics and the unions and all the other pressures on districts. What was put in place was a grant program from the state that said, if your district wants to develop a reasonable evaluation system for teachers that pays attention to the effectiveness of the teachers, and if it wants to place these teachers where they're really needed the most in their district, the state will give funding to pay any extra for those teachers for a period of time, a limited period. And if you don't think your district can do that, just keep going along the way you've been doing, and we'll give you the same mandates and requirements and so forth. But if you do want to do that, we have some funds for you. And 547 or something districts as of this year have said, well, we want to try out this plan, and we're going to try to do that, where they've gotten agreements within their districts to try to improve how they manage their personnel and their teaching force to try to focus on student outcomes.
You mentioned
real quick. I just want to commend. No, before you do that, I want to commend you for staying on top of what's going on here in Texas. I think you're on top of it more than some of our legislators are with our various HB2 and HB3. I just sort of assume you guys out in California, just keep your eyes on the ocean and never look this direction to what's going on in the rest of the country. But that's great. That's really interesting to see you're on top of all that. So sorry. Anyway, I just want to commend him for that.
Absolutely. Good. I was impressed. He's throwing out bill numbers, and I try to purge my brain of them after a legislative session wraps up. But on those two bills that you mentioned, you spoke favorably of what Texas is doing to improve its school finance system. School finance is notoriously complex, especially in a state like Texas, where so much of it is done at the local level. If you were advising the governor and the legislature as we move into our next legislative session in 2027 on how to design a new school finance system, what would you tell them to prioritize?
Well, I always prioritize giving incentives for good performance. You basically have two ways to run a system like that. One is to try to write down what the local districts should do, and the other is to reward them when they find out what to do. And so you want districts, in fact, searching for ways to improve that are consistent with their local capacities and their local demands, but also consistent with what you want them to produce, the quality of students. So I would prioritize having a good assessment system. And I don't think we know enough yet about how the change in assessment systems in Texas are going to work out. But the first thing you want to do is measure performance, student performance, and have that at the center of what you're doing. The second thing is throughout both teacher pay and other aspects of the system, measure whether you're getting results and reward results. There's always this fundamental thing that, well, we're getting bad results, so you just have to give us more money, as opposed to we'll give you more money when you show that you can get the results that we need.
Yeah. Is it more effective to set those results at a common statewide level, so we expect schools to meet these standards, or is it more effective to make that a unique district by district? So if you have a school district that is, you mentioned the example of Houston, that is really failing, they institute reforms and all of a sudden you start seeing massive improvements. Maybe it's not up to the level of, this is where you want to be, but you're moving in the right direction. Do you start rewarding that progress?
Well, I think you want to reward both, and probably have different rewards at different levels of schooling. You want to, we talked about how important parents were. That implies that kids are coming to school with different preparation levels.
Right.
And so when kids come ill-prepared for schools, you want to reward schools that get a lot of growth out of them, particularly in the earlier grades. As it gets up into secondary schools, when they're going to go out into the workplace or on to college, then you sort of weight more how well they're doing than growth. But in general, you want to weight both. You want to weight where you want to be, the outcomes, and you want to weight growth in your formula. And right now, Texas does some combination like that.
We've argued this before. The administration of our schools, or the administrators across our school districts, run on basically three principles, which is the money always comes in no matter what, the money always goes up no matter what, and they're never held accountable for how it's spent or what happens. And so to that last point that you talk about, well, how do we incentivize them to do the right thing? Well, what they would say is, if you mandate it, then that's a mandate. You don't know what you're doing at the state level, and you don't know what's like down here, so you can't mandate it. Well, then if you reward performance, then you're coercing them and you're dangling money in front of them. And so it's a double-edged sword either way. They don't want the mandates, but they don't want the rewards, when the reality is they just don't want to be held accountable for anything. And so that's why, and I want to get back to testing, which you brought up, which is even the testing. They didn't like the STAAR test. They don't like the A through F accountability. And so you say, okay, you don't like these systems. You don't like the way they work. What should we be using to determine whether or not school kids are actually learning anything in schools? And they literally will tell you, just let us tell you. Just let us tell you at the end of the school district, we'll devise our own internal system, and guess what? Magically, 98% of kids will pass, and So how do you? And they came with obviously that didn't fly. Andrew, you have to get. I don't know all the details on this, but I know we got rid of the STAAR test,
we did.
And I think there was supposed to be. I think that at least the proposal was something like where they get tested 3 or 4 times per year.
Right, and I'm not as well versed as our education experts here, but essentially you have multiple checkpoints along the way, and you still do have basically a capstone test at the end of the school year, but you have preliminary tests leading up to that, and the design is really intended to help the teachers to understand where their students are throughout the year, and hopefully customize the way that they're interacting with their students, to, if little Johnny needs help more in reading than math, okay, let's focus in on reading with little Johnny, where Susie might need more help with math than reading, and so we can go in with math on her. So it really, I think the intent behind it really was to make that process more unique to the individual needs of students in the classroom.
Rick, what do you like in terms of testing and to that point you made about trying to, reward results? Well, what kind of tests do you like that do you think produce accurate results?
Well, I didn't answer that question before, but I think you do need statewide tests. I think you need an assessment that you can count on for the state. I think that the system that Texas is moving toward has some positive advantages, and that you want formative tests that tell the teacher what's going on, but you also want a summative test at the end that says, where did you get to? And you can use that information. And they don't have to be linked together. I know that some of the arguments behind getting rid of the STAAR test was, well, we test too much, and secondly, we don't like high stakes tests. It puts too much pressure on people. Well, I'm a believer in high stakes tests in the sense that drives incentives and drives performance. Whether the testing is too much, I think that the STAAR test has been shown to have some predictive validity of what happens to kids after they leave schools, and that's what you care about. Can we measure the skills that are going to be important? I guess I have to be the one who introduces the standard argument about what about AI? What about artificial intelligence? Which is the only thing people want to talk about today, I guess. What I think is going to happen with artificial intelligence is that it's going to make the most skilled workers more productive. It's going to make your high skilled workers be able to do more. It's also going to substitute for low skilled workers. And so what this is going to do is to put more weight and more necessity on getting the schools up to par and to producing really knowledgeable students that have the foundational skills. That's what STAAR always measured, was the foundational skills in math and reading, and there's no way that people are going to thrive in the future if they don't have those foundational skills.
Yeah. Well, we don't have any problem with AI here. We actually we got rid of our producer, and Jefferson's not here anymore. We just use AI. So that voice you heard earlier was just a reproduction of Jefferson. And that is a good question. I mean, AI, of course, is not a replacement for knowing things. It is a tool that can help you. I'm just curious because you brought it up, so now I want to jump into it. Like, what do you think the future of schools looks like with AI? I mean, we've already, whether it's plagiarism problems. Right. Or there's already problems with using too much technology in schools. I mean, here in Texas, there's a whole revolution in trying to get back to classical education and all of that with charter schools and getting rid of technology at all in the classroom. And yet other schools are using AI and laptops and all that. Where do you see the future of the classroom? What does that look like?
Well, I think we're working that out. I don't think we have good sense of where this all leads to. What one of the things we found out, partly in the pandemic and partly with AI, is that AI can help the teacher to know what each student needs, and can work toward individualizing instruction in very productive and profitable ways. But beyond that, I think it changes some of the testing that people can do, how you ask for term papers to be done, and how you grade students and so on. We're just at the forefront of trying to figure that all out. And so we're going to have to wait. But I think what I said about the workplace applies to teaching too. The best teachers are going to find that AI is very helpful to them. The worst teachers are going to try to use that as the exclusive tool, and then we'll find out that, well, we can substitute for that kind of stuff, and we don't need that.
Andrew, if it wasn't my ability to BS my way through term papers,
right,
I don't think I would have ever gotten through high school or college for that matter. If I actually had to know something that was on a piece of paper and like answer it, yeah, I would have never gotten through either one of those. But go ahead.
It brings me to an interesting question, though, and maybe I'm betraying my age here. It seems like the younger generations, this is native to them, right? They're digital natives is the term that you hear thrown around.
Sure.
How do you use AI, view it as a tool to be taught, as incorporated into the workplace, when I would think in many classrooms, the students are more advanced with using AI than the teacher would be?
Well, there's going to be a need for a lot of professional development, which has always been kind of a wasted time in many places of professional development, but you can think of very specific kinds of professional development that helps in terms of AI. I was just recently in Singapore, and they use AI in their classrooms more than any other country in the world, dramatically more. But they've done it with extensive professional development for the teachers to make sure that they're comfortable with it. And they've gotten to a point where the teachers, on average, feel pretty comfortable using AI in their instructional program. If you just, it's like bringing the computer in and not telling the teacher where the on-off switch is. You have to be able to make sure that people know what they're doing. And that's, by the way, one of the problems that I have with mandating things for the local district. It's hard to know what is needed by different teachers and in different districts. And so you end up mandating trivial things for some and things that others don't understand, and it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. What was the most impressive or surprising thing about the way that they use AI in the classroom in Singapore?
That it's sort of fully integrated into their teaching program, and they use that to, in fact, if they need facts or stuff, they bring that into the classroom, and it's not trying to hide the values of AI, but it's trying to figure out how you can effectively use it to do better.
It's almost like a digital teaching assistant.
Exactly, and in part it's that.
Oh, interesting.
Since this is TPPF, I'm contractually obligated to talk about school choice every 5 minutes or so. But I wanted to get back to a point, and we got a couple minutes left, so you've been very gracious with your time. But I did want to hit one thing. You pointed out and you said that when it comes to the things that schools should be spending their time and money on is or the things that improve education, that clearly improve education, are parental involvement. We of course just passed a school choice bill here in Texas, and so hundreds of thousands of parents, hopefully someday every parent in Texas, will get to wake up and where their child goes to school and the kind of education that their child is going to get will very much be their decision. And there can be nothing more important, I think, or more empowering to a parent to get engaged in that than knowing they make all the decisions. The same as making dinner for them and what they eat that night, or what whether they watch TV or whether they're allowed on the internet. I mean, all these things, these decisions that parents make. Now, education is going to be one of those things. So it is very empowering and forces engagement. Have you seen in school choice states? Have you seen that has happened in school choice states where parents become more engaged and therefore outcomes improve?
Well, the place we've seen it most directly over a long period of time is charter schools. We've seen that in Texas, and we've seen that elsewhere. And what we've seen over time is that the charter school sector has improved over time. It's a separate sector that is generally more closely related to outcomes because they have to get their charter renewed if they're going to stay in existence, and it's not as related to mandates. And so that's the place we've seen it. There aren't any very good studies yet of ESAs and the expansion of the kind that you're talking about in Texas. And I'm a big fan of school choice, but I think it's going to be a while before we figure out where it works and who it works for and who it doesn't. I think even with school choice, it's not like all of Texas schools will become private schools. Mm-hmm. What we're going to see is that many parents are seeking out traditional public schools to find the ones that work for their kids, and that's going to be a great gain for individual families. The question is, can we also make sure that puts the right incentives on the schools to get better?
One final question for you as we kind of run out of time here. We're going to go into another legislative session, and, we would really like to, not change the debate necessarily, but improve the debate over things like education funding, because it really does, unfortunately, devolve into, you want less, you want to defund our schools, or, you want less funding. And so it scares Republicans or conservatives into just piling more money into education without ever seeing any real results, or without the left, frankly, even giving any kind of idea as to what kind of new and improved, what the improvements might look like. And so, if you could sit folks down and give them some advice on, on how to, what are the more important things to be thinking about in terms of education funding, what would you want them to focus on rather than just the dollar amount, I guess?
Well, I want them to focus on how the money's used, and that's the emphasis on outcomes. But the example is that your most recent legislative session talked about increases in teacher salaries. Well, you don't get much out of just increasing everybody's salaries. There's the economic principle that I often cite, and that is that bad teachers like more money as much as good teachers. and so if you just pay everybody more, they tend to do exactly what they've done in the past, and you don't, even in the longer run, it takes a long time before you change the supply or the core of teachers that you have. So that's very different than providing funding for salaries, which I think the recent bill did, but I'm not sure of the details. Providing a body, a fund that they can use for teacher salaries, but it doesn't have to be across the board salaries, so that you have incentives for the schools to, in fact, reward and retain the very best teachers, and not reward and retain the worst teachers.
Yeah, I always thought that the connection between raising teacher salaries and improvements was always a very interesting argument, because you're either arguing on the one hand that the current teachers there are holding out on being a good teacher, if only they made $10,000 more, and then, now I'm going to be a good teacher, or you're implicitly, or you're implying that raising the teacher salaries would actually get the good teachers off the bench to come and be in the schools, which of course, that indicts the current teachers that are there now, because you're saying, well, the good ones are on the bench. They just don't want to make, that amount of money. They want to make more money. So either way, you're either saying, well, they're not, the teachers that are there right now are not doing the right thing, or they're not the right teachers.
No, I absolutely agree with you that my own view is that teaching is a very difficult job, and that our current teachers are, on average, working very hard at it and doing the best they can. So it's not that if I dangle a carrot in front of them, they'll work even harder. I don't think there's a huge amount of slack there. What you hope to do is to make sure that the best teachers feel rewarded and stay in teaching, and the opposite at the other end.
So what's your top 5, or just your top 1 or 2? Like which states or maybe even districts are doing it the right way? What could be a model, an example? And you don't have to mention Texas. It could be
I just gave you mine.
Take it.
It's Washington, D.C. It's Dallas, Texas. It's Houston. And perhaps some of the other districts. Now, the districts that are signing up for the extra grants tend to be smaller districts rather than large, so there's a little bit of issue there. We've had other places like Denver, Colorado, that I think historically were looking pretty good, but it's eroded over time. And I think part of that is that there are continual political pressures against doing the things that we should be doing. And so it takes continual monitoring and improvements in order to make sure that these very good ideas keep going as opposed to getting pushed out.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for your time. This has been a fantastic conversation. I'm sure we could keep going on this issue because it's not going away anytime soon, and it's going to be right back here, this time in a couple of years, right, for our legislative session. So we'll be right back in the thick of things, and hopefully be having a better, more informed debate, Andrew, over healthcare, over education financing. So thank you, Rick, for being on the show. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, and I hope to get down to Texas at some point here.
Love to have you. Thanks, Professor.
And thank you, Andrew, for stepping in and helping to co-host with me today. That was a fantastic conversation, and thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And as we always like to say at the end of our show, in the immortal words of Sam Houston, do well and risk the consequences. We'll see you next time.